Hey everyone, it's Allie, and well, we need to start talking about lowlife for Falconer. Due to the upcoming nerfs that are going to be happening to Falconer, where we are no longer going to be able to abuse Cloud Gatherer to have infinite smoke bomb durations, we are going to be gaining a pretty significant EHP nerf that is going to hit us pretty hard. Now, I know a lot of people know or have heard of the low life setup for Falconer, and well, for quite a long time, I've been telling people don't even bother thinking about it. It's kind of pointless, and most people are never going to get to a point where it's ever relevant. Unfortunately, due to the nerfs that are going to be coming to our build, we now have to bring said build into relevancy due to the fact that if you want to push 1,500 corruption or higher, you are now going to have to swap over to low life given how much EHP you're about to lose due to the nerfs to smoke bomb. And that is what we intend to talk about in this build. It's going to be this swap over to low life and the kind of gear that you need, as well as all the changes you want to make to your tree. Before we go any further, I also want to mention that the build guide will be updated with a build variant section right between the leveling and the idle section. That will also contain the build planner and all this information, but also all be in the description below the video as well. Now, before we go any further, I do need to state that if you are not planning to go past maybe 1.1, 1.2k corruption in this build, which for most people most likely are not going to, this is completely irrelevant and this is not something you have to worry about. If you do plan to actually push to 1,500 corruption or higher, if you want to push to 2k or 2.5k corruption, you will have to start considering this and you will have to start farming the gear to be able to swap over to low life. Otherwise, you will just simply not be able to live. Now, I have a whole video that discusses the change that will happen, and I will link in the description below if you want to know more about the smoke bomb nerf. But the TLDR of the nerf is that the word game when you create a shadow, body armor roll, and helmet roll are basically going to be completely irrelevant given the fact that when we put down a new smoke bomb and then use a dive bomb inside of it, Cloud Gatherer will only extend the duration of it with one dive bomb, not including the Shadow Falcons, meaning that we will never be able to have more than one smoke bomb down at any given time. That is a massive nerf for the build because typically what we've been doing is running around throughout an echo, dropping some smoke bombs, using a dive bomb inside of it, and just continuing on forward like this while the smoke bomb is still ticking off screen, generating additional shadows for us, effectively allowing us to have a word pool of somewhere around 1,000 word permanently while we are running around through a given echo. This is a massive nerf for the build because we're not going to be able to have a permanent 2,000-ish or so ward health pool on top of the current health that we have. It means we are substantially squishier and we now need to consider new ways of making this build tankier. And that is where the low life setup is going to come into play. As you can see here, if we quickly look at the last Epoch Tools defensive tab, and again, this is not a perfect calculation of a build. Please don't take these words as gospel, but it is still at least a number that we can look at to judge how tanky a build is. We can see that the low life setup is now going to have about 90,000 effective hit pool and 67,000 EHP one shot, which is the number we actually care about for high end pushing. Your EHP against hit isn't as relevant. And then we can see we also have 30,000 dot hit pool. If we were to look at my current setup, which is pretty damn min-max, as we can see, I'm only around 50,000 hit pool compared to 90,000 hit pool, 30,000 dot in the low life setup versus 10,000 dot, meaning I'm 3 times tankier to dots, which is massive for pushing. And I only have a 16k EHP versus one-shot pool versus a almost 70,000 one-shot pool EHP. That effectively means that this build is going to be somewhere around 3 times tankier than my current super min-max Shadow Dagger Falconer setup, which will allow you to push substantially higher than you were able to previously push. Now, how is this actually being achieved? Well, as we can see here, we are now stacking strength, dexterity, and intelligence at the same time. The reason for this being is that we are now going to be swapping over to an exsanguinous, which is going to be draining our health, but giving us ward based on how much health we're currently missing, as well as adding in a last episode living, which is going to be doing the same exact thing, and a pair of experimental gloves that's going to give us the same exact roll. That means in total, we are losing 50% of our current health per second, and we are gaining 50% of it as word per second. Now, the problem with this is if I don't have a lot of word retention, it's kind of useless because I would never be able to keep up with any of the word I'd be able to gain, and I wouldn't ever actually be able to have a big pool. Well, that is where all this strength stacking is coming into play. If I were to stack intelligence everywhere, it's actually substantially less efficient than if I were to stack strength. The reason for that being is Cleaver Solution. Cleaver Solution gives you intelligence equal to your strength, and because we have a shield such as Bastion of Honor, which can roll up to 10 strength, it is substantially more efficient for us to be stacking a lot of strength and then converting it all to intelligence, while at the same time, because Bastion of Honor gives you 1% block chance per strength against enemies within 4 meters, we can then take that block chance from Bastion of Honor and convert it into glancing blow chance through Deflect and Weave, effectively making up for all of the block chance that you'd be missing from not having it critically erased. With all this put together, as we can see, we have somewhere around 3 340 word retention with a pretty min-max setup. If we were to go over to Tunk Labs and look at our current setup with this last epoch tool setup where we have 2.2k health, if we were to input all of our stats in here of 342 word retention, of 28 health regen per second and 45 current health loss and word gain per second, we can see that we will have a stable 6,000 word per second. Now, this isn't that much word. This is okay. If we had higher word retention, for example, if you had 400 word retention, it'd be a little bit better. But realistically, we are not going to be able to push higher than about 80 to 90 strength in this build. And because of that, this build wouldn't be that strong. Now, where the other little bit of power comes into this, that's going to be able to push this from around 6,000 word all the way up to around 10,000 word or so, is a very, very interesting interaction with Aerial Assault. So Aerial Assault has Healing Gust, which we've always been taking to push all the way over to Aerial Prowess, which is giving us quite a lot of damage for Die Bomb. Well, Healing Gust is always trying to heal you for 50% of your missing health. What we can do is we can take Gustborne Guard, which then instead turns into Ward. And because we're always going to be at low life, because my stable health is 62, that means I'm literally missing all 2,000 of my health, which means every time I Aerial Assault, I'm going to be gaining half of my missing health as additional ward. If we were to think about this, when we also include Aerial Prowess into it, that effectively comes out to about 600 word per second in this 2,000 max health build. And when we put that in, as we can see, we now have a stable 10,000 ward. And because of that, that is how this build is going to actually be able to become substantially better than the normal setup due to the sheer amount of additional ward it has. Not only that, but because we have 83 strength, which is substantially better to stack than intelligence, this is giving me an additional 332% additional armor, meaning I'm now sitting at a permanent 3,000 armor, which is now 50% base mitigation instead of the 34% mitigation that I have in a normal setup. And because we are now dropping Ravenous Void, because we're always at low life, we can now instead run a pair of Eternal Gauntlets, which is going to turn a portion of that armor into damage over time mitigation. And when combined with an Oracle Amulet for less damage taken over time, our effective dot health pool becomes substantially better. So with all this put together, you're going to be substantially tankier just due to the sheer amount of additional armor and additional total health pool you're going to be able to have. So how exactly are we going to be putting all this together? Well, as I mentioned, you are going to need very, very well-rolled items to even consider this. Just slapping on all the low-life items is not going to be good enough. Getting to 83 strength or any sort of mildly high strength is not going to be possible unless you get specific LP rolls on all these unique items that you actually need for this. The other thing to mention here is that you're going to absolutely need to get yourself a either 1 or 2 LP cleaver with a good damage roll on it to make up for a lot of the damage rolls that you're actually losing. Because we are not using a dagger anymore, we are losing quite a lot of damage that we would normally have, and we need to attempt to re-put it back on this cleaver through legendary potential. Now, realistically, a 2 LP cleaver is a little bit hard to get at a 4% chance, but realistically, it's pretty farmable, especially if you're playing at Circle of Fortune. If you are playing Merchant's Guild, these should be very cheap for you to buy, and then these should be very cheap for you to just throw a bunch of axes with crit multi and crit chance on them until you get something pretty decent. If you are going to go for 1 LP cleaver, make sure you get yourself a high strength roll, as the difference between 3 and 9 is quite big. And I would say a 9 cleaver with a little bit of a worse roll on it is a little bit better than a 3 cleaver with a high roll on it instead. The other thing as well that we need to take into consideration here is that we are now losing our dagger, which you most likely would have had your armor shred and your frailty on. That means you're now going to need a new amulet. Ideally, you're going to give yourself an oracle amulet for less damage taken that's going to have the armor shred and frailty on hit that you were missing before. These are 2 mods that you absolutely need somewhere, and you could potentially put these on your gloves as well instead of getting yourself health on the gloves, or to potentially get yourself a new gambit with armor shred or frailty on it instead. But no matter what, you are going to need to get yourself an armor shred and frailty roll somewhere. The other thing to mention, as I said about LP, is that you're going to need to look for at least a strength roll on your Exsanguinous, and ideally you'd get yourself a 2 LP Exsanguinous, given it's a 7% chance to drop, which is fairly common, and the ideal 2 rolls on it would be strength and health at the same time. Finally, the other thing you need to consider here is the fact that you are going to be losing CDR. Because we kind of need CDR for Aerial Assault due to now us really wanting to proc a bunch of them for Gustborne Guard, you're going to have to make a tough decision on your last sips of living, because getting 2 LP last sips living is pretty rare. You're most likely going to only have 1 LP. Do you want to go for flat strength, which is going to give you more armor and more word retention, or do you want to go for 20% CDR, which is going to give you more DPS through your die bomb being lower cooldown, and more mobility through you being able to press more aerial assaults, as well as more tankiness through you also being able to press more aerial assaults? And you're going to have to decide which of the 2 you want to get on here. The final thing to mention about all this is going to be the helmet, as the helmet is also going to change a little bit as well. Before, we wanted a 3 LP peak with dexterity, with percent health, and with word gain on shadow creation, but now we don't need a word gain on shadow creation anymore, meaning you're now going to want to look for a peak of the mountain that you can put strength, dex, and percent health on at the same time. Now, one other thing you could do, another thing you can consider, is to potentially, instead of getting yourself a 3 LP peak of the mountain, it's just to look for a 2 LP peak of the mountain, which are very common, that has a very high all attribute roll on it. It's okay if you would have to drop the percent health roll, for example, as it doesn't matter as much as getting yourself a dexterity or strength roll. But you could also, if you just want to make the tankiest possible helmet, get yourself a 2 LP peak that has strength and percent health on it and just completely drop dexterity, which would make you do less damage. I would still recommend for you to go and farm yourself a 3 LP peak if you are going to go for a peak. And if you get yourself a 2 all attribute ones, that kind of sucks, but it is what it is. But a 2 LP peak with high all attribute roll and strength and percent health or dex and strength on it is also very viable. The final thing I want to very quickly go over is going to be the shield itself, the Bastion of Honor. Now, ideally, you would get yourself 1 LP on it and you could put something like health or resistances on it, but due to the fact that it has a 90% reroll chance, the chance of you actually even getting 1 LP on Bastion is a little bit hard. Realistically as well, because it has a 4 to 10 strength roll on the implicit itself, I would highly favor a 10 strength Bastion of Honor with 0 LP versus, for example, a 1 LP 4 strength Bastion of Honor. That really also depends on the rest of your gear. Ideally, you wouldn't be swapping this build until you get yourself red rings of Atlaria, because these are already a super crucial portion to your build normally, and 2, due to the fact that your resistances in this build are going to be absolutely struggling. Now, what you could do is, for example, get yourself resistances on your gloves instead of getting flat health and hybrid health, or you could potentially put the Armor Shredder Frailty rolls on your gloves or your relic, for example, and then get some risk here. And you could potentially just drop your Jungle Queens completely for a normal build if that would help you get the resistance that you need. But no matter what, you are going to massively struggle without red rings no matter what, and these are going to pretty much be crucial before you actually swap over to a low life setup. What you can do to help all this is to actually use your idols for resistances, because we don't need a bunch of vitality idols everywhere and we're just simply using these for resistances now, and we don't need the ward gain on shadow creation idols anymore. All of our idol slots are completely empty to put whatever you want in here. Now, the idols in this setup are just going to be sample idols of some of the things that you might consider using. For example, there is a crit multi idol in here with throwing damage, and while this would give you quite a lot of damage, if you do need to drop this for more resistances, it's completely okay to do. Some other things you might consider are Eteran idols for either physical resistance, poison resistance, necrotic resistance, or void resistance, which would help you greatly get to your resistance requirements, or to potentially use Ligonian idols with cold, lightning, or fire resistance on them to help you get there as well. If you have any open sockets for 1 slot idols and you need resistances, you might want to consider small Eteran idols that have healing effectiveness as a prefix, because healing effectiveness will now affect Gustborne Guard, which is something we actually care about. Or you can instead consider a Ligonian idol with resistances on it and word retention to make your word be a little bit higher. Finally, if you don't need any of this, you could always go for small Ligonian idols with word and health on them to give you substantially more tankiness overall, or you could consider some stout Ligonian idols with percent health and flat health on them to boost your health as high as possible, which means your Gustborne Guard is going harder and your low life rolls are also giving you substantially more ward. These idols are very flexible, and just simply use them as a way to fix your resistances at first, and then use them to get more EHP secondly, and thirdly, use them to get more damage if you have space to put in an Adorn idol, for example. And with all that said, that's pretty much everything you need to know about the setup. As I mentioned, it's very gear intensive, and it's going to be something that's going to take you quite a long time to actually farm the gear and farm the right LP rolls on said gear to actually make it viable. And again, if you're not looking to push a 2k plus corruption with this build, this is not something you're going to have to worry about. This is a super high in min-max, and in my opinion, if you do end up putting this together, it should actually feel unbelievably comfy due to just the high word you're going to always be able to hold. But do be prepared to lose quite a lot of damage, as no matter what, this is going to be a slightly lower damage setup than we previously had before. With all that said, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. Or you're free to come by my Twitch and ask me any questions you have there. I stream every single day, and I'd be more than happy to answer whatever you have as a question live. Or if you simply just want to join our community, I'd be more than happy to see you around. With all that said, cuties, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next video.